AI is reshaping everything, from how we work and learn to how nations compete for influence on the global stage. What does AI mean for ordinary people, and how should we respond to its risks and opportunities? In this episode of People's Daily Talk, I visit Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University to speak with Professor Xue Lan, the college's dean and the director of the Institute for AI International Governance. Welcome to the talk, Professor.
My pleasure.
So let's start with some questions or issues that ordinary people care about the most. First, will AI take over human jobs? This is my personal concern as well. You know, nowadays there are so many AI anchors. So in your opinion, what kind of jobs are most likely to be replaced by AI?
Probably those white-collar jobs, working with knowledge and working with information and so on. Mm-hmm. For example, if you're a writing assistant, for a politician, you're a legal assistant for a major law firm and so on. Those type of jobs indeed are vulnerable.
Okay, so how about journalism then?
Journalism as well, certainly. I think that's certainly it's possible. But at the same time, that really, I think, if we're talking about the best quality journalism, really getting to the site of the event, mm-hmm. and really has this keen observation on the issues, and then writing sort of the kind of a penetrating analysis, and that can never be replaced. Certainly not in the short term be replaced. Yeah.
So that might be the focus or advantages of human reporters.
Exactly. So I think that even for the kind of jobs I was describing, the top-notch people are still hard to be replaced. So it's really more of the middle range, the middle to good quality work that can be replaced.
Your suggestion might be to be the top of that job.
Yeah. You really have to be at the top of your line, and also you have to have some sort of unique kind of jobs. If you can develop this specific quality to feel about the compassion and to demonstrate your curiosity, and if you can combine of those, that's so special mm-hmm. For human beings. Those qualities, I think, would be hard to be replaced.
Why do some AI systems appear ineffective in everyday applications? Some may not understand your orders, and some it's so easily to tell it is AI-generated content. Could you tell us what are those core technical challenges they face?
We have to understand how the current system can be so powerful. Then we can also understand what its limitations. Mm-hmm. In terms of the generating the content, ask a question and then it responds to us. It's really by correlation. It's been trained by seen so many, various text readings and so on. So they see the correlation, most likely, which words are going to be together. But they actually don't understand the real causalities between those answers. Indeed, for many cases that the system doesn't really understand the real causality behind it. So that makes it hard for it really to shift from one context to another. So they can be very good at one particular thing. But you say, okay, given what you've learned about this, how about shifting this to another set of things? Like human beings, we can adapt and to try to use we learn from one context to move to another. But that's not how the system works. So that's one limitation. The other thing, of course, I think it's still a black box, how the system actually works. So you do have a situation that in the so-called hallucination, and I really gave the totally wrong response. I think there certainly, we have to be very careful. Some really important context. For example, if you want the system to be a doctor, mm-hmm. and then you have to be very careful. And so that's another set of issues. The third is that, remember, I think the system, no matter how powerful, it is really based on what you trained the system for.
Right.
So there are indeed, I think, many of the things that maybe the system have not been trained for. Or maybe the data itself having a lot of problems, biases and so on. So that also may end up, you with, you train on the data with a lot of biases, so your response, the response you get will also have biases.
Right.
So that's also problematic. So I think those are the kind of limitations that we have to be realistic.
So how do you see the prospect? Is it going to be perfect, like even take over humans like in the sci-fi movies someday?
Very hard to say. But certainly people do expect that in the next few years, it's very likely we might achieve so-called AGI, the artificial general intelligence. And that will be very, very powerful. And the real concern is whether we'll get to the time when the system will be out of control. And that's where I think will be in huge trouble. So that's how we should really try our best to prevent that from happening.
Right. So do you think it's the way that we should go to make it so perfect, maybe out of?
Well, I think that certainly we're in this kind of dilemma. On the one hand, we certainly want to improve the system, right? To reduce the hallucination, to make it possible to do a better reasoning, and so that they know the causality and so on. But the more you do that, it's likely that the system might also be able to have its own purpose, own mind, exactly, own mind. So the system might actually, think about why can't I'm in the control position, right? Why do I have to be controlled by human beings, right? So concern on those situations. There are already some studies being done to show that there is indeed sometimes you see the system that's actually deceiving human beings. So that's worrisome. Yeah.
So as a professor and dean yourself, how do you envision AI transforming education? Because I know like many of your students might already use AI to complete their assignments. So how do professors or institutions cope with that?
Yeah, I think, of course, if I can think of AI's application in education, there are potentially two broad categories. One is that without changing the current system, the AI tools are used to facilitate, to improve the efficiency of learning. So I think that's one type of use. Another type of use that it's really re-examining of our system in general to see whether, given we're in the AI age, if we are redesigning the system today, are we going to have the current system? Are we going to divide people into different disciplines? Are we going to divide them into, sort of grade 1 to grade 5 or grade 6, and then going to the secondary school and high school and then to college? So you might do it totally differently. So I think the second type of change is going to be quite disruptive, and it's going to take a lot of time to make the change. So I think mostly people are using that in the first category, without changing the system, but how do we make the current learning more effective? And here, in terms of students using the AI tools for their assignments, I think it's unlikely that we are going to be effective in stopping students from doing that. Anyway, the tool is there, and it can do a better job, right?
Yeah.
So I think here it's more about how can professors, teachers, they use the assignments in a different way. For example, what we do the assignments and so on, you are really trying to examine whether the students have learned what they should learn. And so you want to get the feedback. Well, then you might as well produce different kinds of exams, right? Different kinds of homework assignments. So I heard there were professors who were saying, well, why not encouraging students using sort of the AI tools? So use two AI tools to do the assignment, and then analyze the differences of the two. That's one way, right? There can be many other creative ways, recognizing that those tools will be used anyway, to see how that can be.
Yeah, it is a very honest answer, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can be creative in designing the assignment at first.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's really So the professors really have to change their way of using given the AI time.
Yeah. When discussing AI development, we must consider a very important players, that is enterprises.
Yeah.
So take DeepSeek for example. Despite facing US chip restrictions, it's still shaking up the global AI industry and also challenging the biggest players.
Yeah.
So how do you see those domestic AI advances, especially in light of the technological constraints?
Well, I think first of all, I think DeepSeek is really, I think it's generated a huge impact in the ecosystem. On the one hand, it does have a lot of innovations in terms of how they train the data, how they really gain the knowledge and use that to improve their models. The other thing is also their business models of the sort of open source in a very complete way, not just in the language models, but also in their reasoning models. So they're both technically capable, but also they're also quite, in the business sense, also they are quite capable. That really, I think, shows to a lot of the, not just the Chinese innovators, but also global-wise, that despite there's a sort of industry consensus of the so-called scaling law, it's a more powerful, compute, the more data, and then you get better performance. Despite the consensus on that, you still have, if you're innovative enough, if you have strong self-confidence, you can still find innovative ways to do things in a differently. So that, I think, it's really, provided strong incentive for innovators, large or small, Chinese or international, to try their best to push the envelope. Yeah. And that's where I think what really innovation is about.
Yeah, so they at least prove there is still opportunities in that.
There's still ways, yeah.
Yeah, so the AI industry is rapidly developing as a whole, but many developing countries has yet access or benefit from those artificial intelligence. Could you explain to us what is AI divide? This is still a pressing global issue.
Yeah. Given the AI's development over the last 10, 15 years, it's increasingly concentrated in some major companies. So in some major countries. So I think clearly now in US and China are in the first league, and some other countries behind, and of course many developing countries are left behind. And so I think that in terms of the capabilities of having those big models, you do have countries that simply don't have any viable major AI companies. So that's sort of a reality. I think what people are concerned about is that if this is going to be the trend, it's the future of the world. I mean, if indeed, as we've been talking about, AI has been, so it's going to be so powerful in having the impact on jobs and so on. Will the future of the world be dominated by a few countries or a few companies in those countries? So that's what people are concerned about. And of course, in terms of the developing country situation, this AI divide, you can trace that to the digital divide, because AI is totally reliant on many of the infrastructure, so-called digital infrastructure, and there I think many of the developing countries are still lagging behind. Even I think in some developing countries, even the regular infrastructure for industrial revolution, they're still also lagging behind. The basic infrastructure for the electricity grid and so on, that's sort of the baseline, right? That's the industrial revolution type of infrastructure. And then of course digital infrastructure, internet connections and so on. So all of those are indeed part of this so-called AI divide. Yeah.
So what role can China play to bridging this gap?
Yeah. China has been strong support to find ways to bridge this gap. So in last July, China, working with many other countries, submitted a resolution at the UN to strengthen capacity building at the global level, particularly for developing countries. And that was supported unanimously by many countries. And so that was adopted, and now China is working with Zambia, started a group of friends on AI capacity building to work on implementing that resolution.
From your previous interviews and public speeches, you always emphasize on the balancing of AI development and also governance. Why it is so critical to you?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, of course, if we want to, to move forward with AI's, development, certainly we wanted to have innovation. We want to push the envelope, and so that we can overcome of these limitations of the AI system. But at the same time, when we move forward towards the frontier, we also recognize there's potential for the system out of control. We also have the potential that some people will use that for deep fake. Those sort of risks also is going to be increased. So you always have to be vigilant for those potential risks. So you have to really move on two wheels. Mm-hmm. One is pushing for the innovation, and the other is pushing on the governance, so that you can really, generate AI for good, AI for human beings, and so that we can really, take full advantage of this technology.
So how can countries achieve that?
I would say it's an adaptive process. It's a learning by doing. So many people say, maybe we should first develop a defense, and develop the guardrail before we move on the innovation side. That's a very wishful thinking, because without really pushing for the innovation, you don't know where to build the guardrail.
Right.
Right. So basically, you have to push on the one hand on the innovation side, and then you see some problems, and then you try to address that, and then back and forth. That's the system that China has been doing, the adaptive approach, and learning by doing. That's what we do, and I would assume that's probably other countries can learn from China's experience. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's all of my questions. Thank you for your sharing.
Okay.
So I hope by watching this episode, our audiences can have a better understanding of the AI landscape and also be more prepared to adapt to it. Thanks for watching.